Hello, I'm Craig Rotzler, Senior Conference Manager with FDA News, and welcome to today's webinar on future-proofing your clinical trial supply chain for labeling. This webinar is sponsored by Prisym ID. We're expecting this presentation to last about 45 minutes, followed by a live question and answer session. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Please feel free to prepare questions for our presenters. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the presentation, and the questions will be addressed at the end. To ask a question, simply type your question in the area provided and press enter. Questions will not be viewable to other attendees. We'll take all the questions at the end and we'll look to answer as many as possible. We'll also be providing a written response to attendees of all the questions received during the webinar, including any we're not able to get to today. Also, a copy of the slides will be distributed after the webinar. Now, a little about our sponsor. Prisym ID designs and delivers world-class label management software. With the continual tightening of labeling regulations and audits, the company empowers their clients to safeguard their reputation by ensuring compliance is met and significantly reduce costs by eliminating product recalls and fines created through labeling errors. Labeling is an integral component within the manufacturing production process. Ensuring products are correctly identified and branded is not an option but a necessity. Prisym ID has a proven track record of delivering global label lifecycle management solutions and have a fundamental impact on their clients, manufacturing processes, and distribution. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. Jason James has been running the clinical trial label production and assembled operations at Bristol Myers Squibb UK since 2001. Jason has also been involved in the project management of trials at the BMS Morton site, from initial demand to final dispatch. During his time at BMS, Jason has been a member of the team that has implemented SAP and label creation software globally. Recently, Jason has been an active member of the ISPE e-labeling and pictogram teams and is also a member of one of the Transcellular e-labeling teams. He's joined today by Vince Pastille. He heads up the global product and business development at Prisym ID. Vince has worked within the life sciences sector for over 12 years. Over the last 5 years, he has worked extensively within the packaging, labeling, and printing area of clinical trials. In this area, Vince has been fortunate enough to work with some of the leading clinical trials companies in developing products and solutions to improve their process and technology used in the supply chain. Without too much further ado, let me hand it over to Vince.
So hello to everyone, and thank you very much for attending today's webinar. I'd just like to reiterate the request for questions. It'd be absolutely ideal if you could ask some questions as we go through the presentation today. It'd be absolutely excellent, so thanks very much for that. And then we will respond to these questions at the end of the presentation. We also have a live poll in the middle of the presentation, where myself and Jason will comment on the live results. So halfway through, we'll be asking you to make a few selections, quite straightforward, quite simple. So the agenda for today's session covers three main areas. Firstly, we're going to look at the emerging challenges for the packaging and labeling in global clinical trial supply chain. Then we're going to cover some of the software technologies that can help meet these challenges. And then finally, we're going to look at how these labeling technologies bring capabilities to the clinical trial supply chain and how to future-proof your investment. So let's kick off by considering some of the drivers in clinical research today. At Prisym ID, we've been supplying labeling software to clinical research organisations, pharmaceutical firms, CROs and CSOs for many years. And the last couple of years have seen some significant changes from the industry. So let's take a look at some of these challenges. Firstly, shortening the time to market. The pressure to reduce the time to develop new drugs and medicines continues, driven both by the patent cliff and an increasing competitive nature of the pharmaceutical industry. So time to market certainly remains a key driver for all. Secondly, patient retention. Last couple of years have seen a noticeable shift to focus onto the patient's involvement in clinical research. Keeping patients involved and engaged through a positive experience is now widely recognised as a key to maintaining patient retention. Now let's consider costs. Another very significant change for the industry is the growth of biologics and biosimilars, representing a large percentage of clinical trials underway. They do offer their own challenges in terms of their supply and management. They're significantly greater in cost than chemical IMPs, meaning stock overage and wastage really affects the budget for a clinical trial. They often require a cold supply chain with close monitoring in case of any temperature excursions. If their shelf life and dosage are not accurately known at the start of the trial, it's more likely that the stock will require relabelling in preference to being destroyed. Also, triggered by the need to reduce trial timescales and costs, the adoption of adaptive trial techniques are increasing. Utilising analytics, trial managers may alter the protocol during a trial to increase its success. This might include the dosage, subject population, or sample size. Next, and linked to the previous point, many regulators are actively encouraging clinical research to span many countries in order to improve the quality of the results. This is also attractive as many emerging market countries offer access to wider patient population, which may be a critical consideration in the development of rare disease drugs. Interestingly, Home Trial Site Specialists, the Medical Research Network, MRN, has found, as of June 2016, there are commercial clinical trial sites active in 140 countries around the world. Interestingly, 60% of these sites are in just 5 countries: US, Germany, Japan, France and Spain. The other 40% are active trial sites are in the remaining 135 countries. MRN does anticipate an increase of trials in emerging countries over the next 5 to 10 years. Finally, let us consider the regulatory landscape. The regulations regarding clinical trials, and especially packaging and labelling, still varies between countries. Many of the emerging market countries are catching up with the levels of regulation in place for the Western countries. Even so, there still exist differences and discrepancy between regulations. Not meeting the requirements may affect the import of IMPs into a country and the supply to clinical sites. Even in Western countries, regulations vary and change. Many await with interest the effect Brexit has on clinical trial regulations uniformity across Europe, at a time when new EU regulations are being implemented. What I'd like to do now is maybe just hand over to Jason and ask him a couple of questions, basically, in terms of, are the above representative of the drivers for the supply chain change that you've seen over recent years?
Thanks, Vince. Yeah, I agree. I think time to market's always been a big driver. It's gained importance over the last few years, but reduction in cost is also a big driver. Probably one of the biggest drivers we have now. We're having small amounts of drugs available, and if we're using a comparator, the cost of comparators is increasing, making us all having to pull our belt in to be able to get trials done. With the increase of biologics, there's also increase of label complexity. I think there's a minimal text labels and pictograms help, but they also have their own challenges. There's things like requirements for biologics for China, if you're using CIQ permit. Korea has had requirements, all making biologics more and more complex. A number of markets base their regulations also on Annex 13, but then they add additional requirements, making it harder and harder to produce a label. You can't base it on Annex 13, or you base it on Annex 13, but then other items have to be added. Annex 6 is only going to make this harder with the need to add an expiry date at all levels. Patient experience is important, but there's also the site and centre experience. This seems to be gaining more importance. A number of companies seem to be going from sending their drug to a site or a depot and moving on to the patient. They're sending direct to the patient now. There's companies out there offering shipping direct to the patient with fridges with iPads built into the fridge, so they're able to monitor the temperature of the drug. So there are a lot of challenges with supplying drug to patients at home. There's also the challenges with importation, label contents on the label. We need regulatory text on the label, but we also need to have the text that's needed to import the drug to the country. So the text is now not just regulatory, it's regulatory and importation text. This affects different ways. For example, if you have there's other things like Arabic and Israeli on the same label. The Arabic countries won't accept a label if Israeli's on there. So these challenges of importation seem to be getting bigger and bigger.
Okay, thanks very much, Jason. Basically, in terms of yourself and your peers in the industry, I mean, which ones do you think are the most significant, having the greatest impact?
I think with the price of biologics and the reduction in drugs we have, I think cost is a big one. We're trying to reduce costs, we're trying to reduce wastage and reduce overage. But the cost of the drug itself, whether it's produced internal or it's a comparator, is increasing. The overages we're wanting to have, we need to decrease, because some companies have had 20, 30, 40% overage of drug that's basically wasted. The studies are getting more complex. The number of changes on the labels are increasing. The number of countries are increasing, and the trials are using more and more across different trials. So I think that's the big one.
Thanks very much, Jason. No, perfect, great. So we've covered what industry changes are occurring in clinical research. So now let's consider the impact these have on the clinical trial supply chain, in particular how your packaging and labelling operations are affected. Firstly, let us consider the time to market. As pressure is on for faster clinical trials, so the processes around packaging and label design, approval and production will be under pressure to be more efficient. Label design and approvals can be challenging to perform more quickly, but so is label production, especially if it is outsourced, as booklet production usually is. Shortening these lead times can prove to be a big obstacle. Now let us consider the need for on-demand packaging to overcome some of these challenges. While stock overage has always been an area of focus for clinical trial supply chain professionals, the dramatic increase in IMP costs triggered by the growth in biologic trials has made stock control more critical than ever. The model of oversupply to clinical sites or even local or regional warehouses is proving not to be an ideal solution. For many, a move to an on-demand supply chain is the best answer, packaging, labelling and shipping IMPs in response to real patient demand rather than initial forecasts. IMPs are packaged in their primary packs at a central distribution site and then packed into their secondary packaging and finished labelling on demand, ready to be drop shipped to clinics in time for patient appointments. This packaging and labelling based on patient demand promises to minimise stock wastage, but it's a significantly different production model which requires changes for any supply chain based on the traditional batch production model. In addition, the biologics are adding to the requirement to introduce cold chain logistics to ensure there are no temperature excursions, as these might impact patient safety. Another challenge is managing changes to the trial protocol. This is one of the frequent challenges faced by clinical trial supply teams every day. The change to a trial protocol may mean adding additional countries to the trial or changing expiry dates or dosage instructions. Today, this often means creating new labels or amending labels or stock in regional depots. As adaptive trials become more prevalent, the need to be able to change label content increases. Associated with this, the next point, where more countries are involved in a trial and language management overhead becomes greater. This challenge includes the translation of text on labels, as well as the formatting of different language text, fitting it onto a label, right alignment for certain languages, and also the inspection of different languages, which is difficult for non-native speakers. And finally, as the number of countries varies and grows with each trial, ensuring the packaging and the labelling is compliant with each specific country regulatory requirements is a challenge. Often organisations depend on in-country experts to explain and approve both languages and regulatory requirements. As these change frequently, it is a challenge for label designers to be sure they have the latest requirements. So Jason, I'll hand over to you again if I may here. So which of the above do you feel is the greatest challenge to packaging and labelling still remaining?
I think ensuring labels stay compliant is a big challenge at the moment. Phrases in the past, I think a number of companies used to grandfather them in. When a new label was created, the phrase would then be added. But more and more, we seem to be seeing changes have been issued with timelines. Either addresses need to be in by a certain time because of to fit in with filings, or there's cases where certain phrases have to now appear on the label, bolded or made to stand out. These need to go in by a certain timeline, so these timelines getting shorter and shorter, making it harder to ensure the label still stays consistent. With the production internally, that's a headache, but it's an even bigger problem when you put bucket labels into the mix, because with the proofing and the lead times of those, that's a real challenge.
Thanks very much. So, I mean, are there ones that you feel have been addressed and that they're solved? They're already been solved for you?
I wouldn't say solved, but the postponement on demand is starting to address some of the challenges. I think a number of companies are now starting to look at this as a process with small quantities of drug, and they're using it to do over a number of different trials. It's gaining favour with companies. It won't truly benefit the process, but the labels are produced. The process won't truly benefit until the labels are produced in possibly a print and apply manner, where they can be printed and applied in the room. Currently, they tend to be printed up front, which, although solves some of the problems, doesn't solve all of them.
Okay, thanks very much. I mean, we're going to have our poll later on where we're going to be asking about some challenges. But again, I mean, are there other challenges for supply chain today or emerging on the horizon that I haven't covered here?
I think one of the challenges is probably Annex 6. There seems to be a lot of discussion about that, how it's making it harder to label. The need to add expiry date to all levels of packaging is making it far more complex. It's making the impact on packaging and data extension process, also introducing the chance of error, because currently we tend to put the expiry date on the outer carton in some cases, and if you data extend the outer carton. When you go to every level, then these cartons have to then be started to be opened up, breaking tamper seals. That when the additional labelling's done, it's the added controls to make sure there's been no mix-up. So I think that's one of the ones that's possibly emerging.
Okay, thanks again, Jason. Perfect. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to sort of consider some of the existing limitations. So there are other inherent limitations in the typical supply chain that may make adapting to new challenges difficult. First and foremost, if the supply chain has been designed around a batch mode of producing and packaging clinical trial packs, it may not be easy to change to an on-demand model. For instance, on-demand requires packaging and labelling to be performed quickly and accurately in a just-in-time fashion, specific to each patient demand. Booklets are often used as a mechanism to convey all the information required in multiple languages. Unfortunately, they can prove a restriction when protocol information needs to change. Their design and production adds delay to clinical trial supply chains. They are not easy to alter once printed, and their use can have a negative impact on patient experience. And finally, they can be quite costly. Another limitation is the way in which the regulator requirement to inspect each printed label is met. For many supply chains, this is a manual human activity where each label is inspected, or a random sample of the labels are checked for quality and accuracy. The problem is labels have different languages, and these can be hard for humans to check accurately and consistency. As has been said, especially for those with non-English characters. In addition, it can be difficult to check that the regulatory requirements for content are correct on each label. And finally, another restriction inherent in most clinical trial supply chains is where changes to protocols such as dosage or storage or expiry information requires a change on the label. If the stock is already in a regional depot, there may be no easy way to change these labels without introducing risk of errors. So, Jason, what is your opinion on that? There are other limitations that can cause problems?
I think a big limitation at the moment for problems is the booklet one you touched upon. They have a number of advantages, or we wouldn't be using them as an industry, but they also have a number of disadvantages. They have long lead times with the proofing process and the manufacturing process, and then the overprinting process if variables being done at a vendor, or if they're being bought in-house, they need to be inspected, overprinted, then inspected again. So these lead times can go from 8 to 15 weeks depending on the process and the vendor, which is quite lengthy in the process. This can be compounded even more if we're using comparator, because sometimes the variable information is not known from the comparator till it's received, so again causing more delays in the process. It is a two-step process, so the generic labels are produced up front, then the variables added at a second process. So it's not just one process, it's two. They are costly. They're not very patient-friendly. There are a number of surveys been done that say quite a high percentage of the booklets are never opened. Some of the patients don't like the fact that they can flap about if they're on vials, etc. And something recently I heard is they're not very site-friendly either. A number of sites, again, if they're trying to put a solution from a vial, it can be very difficult with a bucket label flapping around. But the other thing that was mentioned is a number of the vials now put in isolators and sprayed with alcohol. They're trying to keep a clean environment, not a sterile environment, but a clean environment, and the vials themselves, the external the vials kept clean. With a bucket label on, the alcohol being applied to the vial doesn't fully clean it. The film was could be dust, and there could be trap points within the booklet. So yeah, they do have their problems.
Great, thanks, Jason. So Jason and I, we shared our views on the packaging and labelling challenges facing most clinical trial supply chains. Probably a good idea, and hopefully you can sort of answer some questions that we're going to put up on the screen shortly. So if you could consider the most important and the biggest challenge for your particular organisation, that'd be great. Spend a minute or two to vote. If none of these challenges for your organisation, if they don't actually sort of resonate with you, please feel free to select other, and we'll see if there are sort of additional challenges emerging. So I'll hand over to Craig now to give you sort of instructions for this poll.
Thank you, Vince. The poll is now open. You should see it on your screen just underneath the question and answer panel. So what you want to do is find your selection and press submit. Question reads, which is the biggest challenge for your organization's packaging and labeling operations? So the options are A, time to market, B, patient centricity, C, biologics, D, study protocol changes, E, multinational trials, F, regulatory landscape, or G is other. If it's other, we ask that you enter your comment in the Q&A panel above. So we'll keep this poll open for just another moment while people make their selections. And don't forget to click the submit button after you make your selection so it is counted. Keep it going for just another 5 more seconds. Go ahead and close the poll now, and we'll publish the results. As you see, the results are published, and so I'll hand it back to Jason and Vince to go over the results.
Okay, so we've got some interesting results there in terms of sort of time to market. Got 14% there. Pressures with biologics, study protocols, here we go. So D, so study protocol changes, adding more countries mid-trial or changing expiry dates. That certainly seems to be one that's coming out as the main one. Jason, I expect you expected to see that?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's a big problem because trials are being started without knowing fully the number of countries, so it's been started quickly. Countries are needed to be added, and as they're added, that causes the complexity, especially if it's a booklet label. You're starting with 10 pages and then adding another 5 countries and then maybe another 5. Changing the expiry date, it's always been a problem, is keeping up to date. If it's in early stage trials, then the expiry could be very short, use date could be very short. I find it quite interesting that B had 0 patient centricity, because I was only talking recently to someone who was saying that the problem with for them for bucket labels is because to get the text on the small containers of any label, they were having very small font sizes down to 4-point size, which was making it almost unreadable for the patient. So I'm surprised there's no one voted for that one.
Yeah, indeed. So, and from my perspective, I sort of F there with sort of 23% in terms of regulatory landscape, ensuring compliance with each regulator's specification. I know that's come across a lot in terms of our technology, in terms of regulatory rules management within the software. So thank you very much, everyone, for contributing to that small survey. Thank you. So having spent time considering the challenges and limitations for today's clinical trials supply chain with regards to labelling, we can now look at those technologies that are here or are emerging which may help to transform the supply chain. We're going to look at this from a technology perspective rather than from the Prisym IT product angle, although many of the technologies we are actively working on today. Let us initially consider the data-driven model. For most off-the-shelf label software, the information is static on the label, and you have a different label for each product. At Prisym, we found the most effective way of designing and printing complex labels with accurate, up-to-date data is to utilize a data-driven model. With data-driven design software, the label designs are dynamic. The label designs use variables which are placeholders for the data. This enables the latest, most up-to-date data to be used when the label is then printed. It also means that data populated on a label can be dependent on the type of label itself. For example, the regulatory text or symbols may be specific to the country that a label is destined for. One benefit of this approach is that it can greatly reduce the number of label formats required, and therefore the management overhead associated with label design and approvals. For example, the same label format design can be used to generate labels for different products or batches and for different countries. Only the appropriate text, symbols and translations will be included on the label. These will also be automatically formatted. So, for example, some country regulations require a certain font size, or Arabic text might be right aligned. New images, symbols, marketing statements or language translations can be defined and approved separately from the label formats in production. And once approved, they can be utilized in label prints as required. As highlighted, finding a way to manage the many combinations of language and phrases used on labels has been a challenge for many years. Many clinical research functions have addressed this through development of in-house language and translation management databases, or relying heavily on translation services and tools from translation providers. In particular, the phrases aspect is very important for clinical trial label. For dosage instructions, an example is take 1 tablet once a day, take 2 tablets twice a day. The way these are translated and managed becomes very significant. Using a process that involves the translation and approval for every label does introduce an overhead to the label design and approval process. Having to have each label checked by a language specialist can be costly. However, a good software tool should provide the translator with the ability to easily control and manage languages and phrases. It should enable the reuse of translated phrases with confidence that the context is always correct. Jason, how have you addressed language management in the past?
Well, I know a number of companies they translate the label, each label separately every time, and then back translate it, meaning this, as you said, the same phrase is translated over and over again rather than reusing it. We, like a couple of other companies, have got an internal database system. It was designed internally 10 or 12 years ago, where we select the phrase in English from a drop-down, and then we select the languages, and it produces, from pre-approved translation phrases, it produces a page per country. It's very good. It does exactly what it says on the tin, except for with some of the recent regulatory changes, well, by recent I mean over the last 7 or 8 years, it wasn't designed for some of those changes in mind, so it is struggling to keep up with some of the regulatory requirements, so we have a paper-based system to back that up. It's still better than translating each time. By a long way, we're not retranslating the same phrase. Most phrases, as they need to be translated, are entered into the system. Then once they're in the system, they're approved there. There is the approval systems in the system, so it's all stored and Part 11 compliant. But it's not the perfect solution by any means of imagination.
Okay, so I mean, really, I mean, is it easy to solve once and for all, do you think, or is this sort of an ongoing challenge?
I think it's an ongoing challenge because the regulatory environment is always changing. It never stays the same. We've always got things as requirements from Israel to add the caution statement translated in four languages that has to be in bold on the label. You've got the Annex 6 coming up, and then there's also even the possibility of impact from Brexit for the UK. Currently we're following Annex 13 and probably will, but will we be Annex 13 as Annex 13 going forward? The environment's always changing. It seems to be changing quicker now than it ever was in the past.
Yeah, okay. So another technology area that has progressed significantly is print inspection hardware. Primarily driven by adoption in the broader manufacturing sector, the technology has developed in terms of quality, accuracy and cost. Previously, this vision inspection hardware has had limited deployment in clinical trial supply chains for label quality. And the reasons are, clinical trial labels are often small with complex content, which is not easy to inspect. Also, batch runs may be small as well, so the overhead of configuration of a print inspection system and its testing for small batch runs has proven prohibitive, as it's easy just to check manually. If the text and images remain consistent or are limited to a few languages, then it's easy to check by a human. However, as complexity and the range of languages increases, the human visual inspection then becomes infeasible. As Prisym ID, we've seen a lot of interest from clinical research companies who consider automated vision inspection as a critical part of future-proof supply chain operation. We've taken this a step further by closely integrating our label software with one of the leading print inspection systems. A close integration offers the following advantages. The inspection mask can be created and verified in the label format editor, providing a single user interface to make it easier. The print inspection hardware can inspect both static and variable data, so all aspects of the label are properly inspected. All inspection results can then be captured and stored in the same audit log file that records the print job details. Additionally, the images of the failures and the subsequent operator actions can also be logged, creating and simplifying the audit log process. So, Jason, what's your opinion about the use of vision inspection systems at the moment and going forward?
Well, there have been vision systems there for a number of years, and there are a number of companies that use them, but they were very simplistic and very clunky. There used to be a pixel by pixel check of one label against the proof. There was all the work the operator had to be trained to be able to align the two labels. It couldn't check the variable. All it could check was you've printed the right label, but not the variable that was on it was correct. So it wasn't ideal, but then that came forward a little bit. There was vision systems out there, similar to what you're describing, that can check the labels, but they struggle to check variable. They can check the expiry date, they can check the batch number, because other variables, as far as we're concerned, they're basically fixed per run, and that allowed us to do that. But they struggle with randomized numbers. Randomized numbers was the real problem. The systems out there, if you were buying your meat and there's a barcode that was used by the shop to ensure that the right weight of meat was used, they classed that as a variable, and that would compare the weight on the label to the barcode, but that wouldn't do what clinical trials needed. You mentioned system that does variable, that's what's needed, that can do all variable. When checking labels with humans, whether the small quantity and small complexity, small number of countries, there's always the human error. Whether they're checking 10 labels to 10,000 labels, even the best operator with the best intention looking at some of these is going to struggle. So a system will eliminate errors. It's also the error of things like you're printing a label with container number or patient number 1008 and it's printed as 1003 because there's been a crease in the ribbon, there's been a problem with the printer. That might easily be missed by an operator if it's only a little bit of the 8 that's missing, that you couldn't tell whether it's a 3, whether it's an 8. And this will the inspection system will drastically reduce timelines and reduce costs. It will reduce the process down from 2 to 1 potentially. At the moment, we print labels, then we inspect labels, then we use the labels. If we can have a vision system that does the label as it's printed, you're going from print and inspect as one process with very minimal human interaction, and the human interaction is where the error tends to occur. This will also probably enable the print and apply process I mentioned earlier. I think when you can print and apply, you can potentially print the labels in the room, they're printed and inspected specific to the container, and that way it's no chance that it's the right label is printed for the right container at that time, rather than the chance of dispensing the wrong labels as well. So I can see automated inspection systems have a great number of benefits going forward, and it can only get better for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been seeing the same, and that's why we put so much investment and time into that part of our product. So we now consider how these technologies may help you create a future-proof supply chain. By future-proof, we mean packaging and labelling model or capacity and capability that will be flexible enough to help you support the changing requirements for clinical trials for the next 5+ years. So to finish the presentation, let's outline what the packaging and labelling capability in modern clinical supply chain could look like. Firstly, paramount is the need to have flexibility to support the varying business demands. We see the ability to support on-demand packaging and shipping as increasing in importance to reduce stock overage and the requirement to rework labels in regional depots. But existing batch production models are still going to be needed, and which model of production is used will depend on the clinical trial objectives and the protocol. Secondly, we anticipate the ability to do on-demand will help support a restructure of the distribution network, perhaps resulting in consolidation of regional or local depots. Being able to perform secondary packaging and labelling where required also better facilitates drug pooling. Delaying the printing of labels until required to ship will help ensure the latest expiry dates or dosage instructions can be used, increasing patient safety. Automated print inspection will help assure the quality of labels printed in remote regional warehouses, with the results of the printed label inspection recorded in the central audit log for reporting and auditing purposes. More accurate, error-free labelling helps ensure shipments can be made direct from regional hubs to clinical sites or perhaps patients' homes. Thirdly, a future-proof supply chain model should provide greater flexibility in the globalization of label design functions and country-specific expertise, be it regulatory or language knowledge. Label design functions may be located at different regional sites and share the label design activities for the global supply chain operation. These may work closely with the in-country regulatory and language teams, using the same data and software tools to streamline label design and approvals. The outcome will be shortening of the time between label design to print, as well as more effective utilization of skills and knowledge. The benefit will be the countries can be added to the study without incurring delay in the changes to the packaging and the labels. In building these three areas of capability, the clinical trial packaging and labelling operations should be well placed to meet emerging clinical study needs, namely being able to minimise time to trial startup, being flexible in how and where clinical trial packs are packaged and labelled, and also being able to add new countries to trials easily whilst ensuring the accuracy of the data on the labels. Jason, can you tell me what are your views on the models that I've just described? Would it support your team's objectives?
Yeah, I think on-demand is another string to our bow. With the increasing challenges of clinical trial labelling, we need an arsenal. One solution doesn't fit all. And we want to make sure that suppliers we can deliver to the patient as quickly as possible with as little wastage as possible. This on-demand gives us greater flexibility, ultimately helping to get to this print and apply model, whether that's in a packaging room, in a warehouse, in a hub. The print and apply is to me the ultimate on-demand or postponement strategy. It grants more flexibility to text compiling, label text and labeling process. You can compile the text easier. You can print the labels quicker, and it supports the labeling process itself. It would also enable drug pooling, I think, because drug pooling is also quite important now, because we're having less and less of a new compound available, and also with expensive comparators. And the pooling allows us to use the same drug over a number of different studies, protocols, trials, etc. with as little wastage as possible, because we'd label at the point of dispensing, not beforehand, and have it sat on the shelf pre-labelled up. It'd stop us having to relabel supplies as we currently do to ensure they're suitable for different countries, etc. And so I think that would help support some of the team's objectives.
Great, thanks. Are there additional aspects you think are needed in supply chain packaging and labelling capabilities?
I think the one the one I think that jumps out at me is probably labelling for importation. It's a little bit like regulatory requirements. We put the regulatory requirements for the label on the label, but now more and more we seem to be having an impact of importation, where they require specifics to be on the label to import. So it's not just the regulatory for the trial, it's also the importation as well. Examples are manufacturer needs to be on the label for certain countries to import. It needs to be the correct manufacturer, needs to be things for the CIQ license for if it's a biologics. These seem to be over the last year, 18 months, seem to be increasing. So that's something, although it is a regulation and could be classed as along with regulatory requirements, it is a importation requirement.
Okay, so, well, thanks again, Jason. Much appreciated. Very informative answers there during the presentation. So what I'm doing, I've finished the sort of main presentation here with Jason, so I think if I hand over to Craig, hopefully we'll have some questions that have been posted during the presentation. So, Craig, hand over to yourself.
All right, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, now is your opportunity to have your questions answered by our presenter. Remember, this portion of the conference is also being recorded. Ask a question, use the question and answer panel on the screen, type your question in the area provided, and press enter. We'll get to as many questions as we can in the time remaining. We'll also provide written responses to the attendees of all the questions received during the webinar, including any that we're not able to get to today. Looks like our first question from Michelle. She writes, good presentation. Are you expecting that all human inspection of labels will be replaced by machine inspection?
Well, the students here, so what I'll do is I'll pick that up initially from a technology perspective. So I'd say sort of not completely. I mean, from our perspective, we're seeing an increased use, a massive interest in it, as I said, in terms of the investment we put in sort of integrating that into our solution. Clearly, it's faster, there's a sort of the accuracy involved, and it doesn't require what seems to be happening in terms of sort of 200–300% inspection, becoming much more affordable. So clearly I think that's going to sort of take over from that perspective. We went through the sort of simple label approach versus sort of the complex labels, and how you know, the inspection sort of side of things, and the quantity of that you're inspecting. So I'm sort of seeing it as increasing, certainly a lot of interest, as I say, but in terms of it taking over completely, I don't think so. I think there's always going to be a need for the visual inspection, but it's very interesting to hear Jason's comments regarding print and apply. Clearly in that space there, when you're getting high-speed production, I'm sure there's going to be visual sort of sampling inspection, but if you can do more of that, then visual inspection is really going to come into their own. Jason, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Vince. I think bucket labels are the big issue. I think that the three parts of a bucket label is a variable panel usually. Well, I'll say three parts. Most people have variable printed on the label. They have the cover page, which is usually table of contents, and then they have the content within the booklet. Now, a vision system can do two of those three. The variable is the critical part. It can also probably do the cover page, but the inner content it wouldn't be able to do. So I think that's where the limitation will be, but I think that the inner page is checked by human anyway, at least one of them, to make sure the right booklet's been used. But as we said earlier, we're all moving towards less and less bucket labels and using less and less bucket labels. So although that's the biggest issue, I see that being less and less an issue as we're using less and less bucket labels. On demand, the more we use that, there'll be a decrease in the use of bucket labels. On demand, we'll have a single panel, giving us the reduced timelines, reduced costs and ease of use. So I don't think we'll ever get to 100% inspection, but I think we'll get right down to a much slower quantity that's inspected by humans.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll remind our listeners to ask a question. They can type their question in the area provided in the Q&A panel and press enter, and we'll take your questions. Next, we have a question from Karen. She asks, how do you efficiently address the QP release requirements for on-demand labeling?
I'm going to hand over to Jason on that one, if you don't mind, Jason.
Yes, thank you. It will depend from country to country and company to company. I think QP release, it depends where you count as on demand and just in time. I'm going to get a bit complicated with it. I see those as completely different things, on demand and just in time. It all comes under the postponement strategy. Some of them, you will have a kit that is identified with a barcode or an item that you take into a room, you swipe the barcode, it then tells the system which kit you've got, prints the label out in the room, and that can be inspected with an electronic inspection system and applied to the kit. You can then scan the barcode on the new label to make sure it's correct. I can see, because of the inspection part of it, and you could have quality in the room, QP would be happy with that to an extent. When you go to just in time, that then comes to country by country and QP by QP, because to me just in time is done a little further on. There is some sort of identification, but the additional labelling is done in the warehouse or the distribution centre. So that's where certain regulatory authorities will probably accept that, and others may not, depending on what text is on the label, depends on what the warehouse has been audited for and what they are, whether they're a GMP labelling area, whether not a GMP labelling area. So I think it's down country by country, and it's down company by company. It is achievable, it is possible. The worst case scenario for on demand is you print the labels up front, you have them sat in an area, and you use them and dispense them as and when required, but that doesn't cover the later text being put on there. It doesn't include the updated caution statements, expiry dates, etc. So it's still an evolving method of packaging. I think there's a lot of people using the term on demand and just in time and postponement in different ways. It depends on what you understand by them all. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I'm glad you took that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have our next question from Viviana. For Vince, how does the vision system checks the string embedded into a QR code that can take you to a web page containing all the information for the clinical drug?
Yeah, so Vince here, so good question. So my understanding, I mean, we inspect the label, so we inspect for the sort of the text, we're looking for images, we're looking for clear areas, and the barcode is equally one of those areas we check. So we are actually reading the barcode itself and actually making sure that the content of the barcode is correct. When you actually point into a website, you're looking at a sort of string that's fairly standard, but if you're encoding masses and masses of data, I must admit I've not come across that, if the actual code itself is storing a lot of the being a sort of like a portable data file, as it were. But if it's actually just the string in terms of taking to the website, we are checking for barcode, actually what the barcode characteristics are, etc.
Perfect. Again, as a reminder to our audience to ask a question, they can type their question there provided and press enter. Next from Tony, saying, Jason, interesting comment regarding use of booklet labels. Can you quantify the decrease in use, perhaps personally or across the industry?
If there's nothing decreased now, the intention is to start decreasing them. I was talking with a number of companies, a meeting last week, and I think a number of us were aiming to try and reduce in some way some of the booklet labels. It's not that we've got a problem with the booklet labels. We all like them. We wouldn't be using them if we didn't, but it doesn't give us some of the flexibility we'd like. So they won't be eliminated altogether, but from what I was hearing, the intention was to try and use them when needed and not as a standard approach, whereas currently they seem to be the standard approach for a number of different packaging operations, whereas by reducing them gives us slightly more flexibility in some ways. Hopefully, Tony, that answers your question.
All right, thank you very much. And our next question is from Stephen. Isn't it easier to just outsource label design and production to a specialist as well as other distribution aspects to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, so Vince here. My experience is that large pharmaceutical companies they can afford to have their own sort of systems in house. There are clinical supplies organisations clearly that can do the labelling, packaging, distribution, and yeah, it could be outsourced. So I'm seeing sort of both those models really in terms of large R&D organisations running their own trials in house and then subcontracting some of those to the CSOs. But clearly to have a sort of fully validated end-to-end solution, there is a cost associated with that. So yeah, good question. And but I'm seeing sort of both those areas in terms of percentages. I'm not sure. Maybe Jason can sort of enlighten us in terms of how the sort of larger pharmaceutical companies sort of handle that. Jason?
Yes, no problem. If we did outsource label design and production, I think I'd be out of a job. So I'm going to be very, very in favour of keeping it in house. But seriously, there are a number of companies are outsourcing the label design and production, and there are a number that are keeping it in house, and some have a mixture of both. The advantage to me to keep the production in house is you reduce your timelines. You increase your flexibility. If you're having booklets, you're not able to respond very quickly because booklets, as we said earlier, have 8 to 12 weeks to produce them. If you're even single panel labels, they take the time to do the proof, approve the proof, be manufactured out at a vendor. Whereas if you can do them in house, you can sometimes turn labels around in 24 hours. You are working with your own schedule and not a schedule that has a number of other competitors in there that the vendor possibly can't move as easily as you can. And we all have challenges and issues come up where we need to ensure a patient stays on drug. A challenge happens here, happens there. We need to produce labels. I see producing labels in-house supports that and enables us to supply to the patient in a quickly and timely manner, ensuring they stay on drug.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. That seems to be all the questions we have for you for today. Do you have any closing remarks before we wrap up? Or, Vince, can you tell us a little bit about what Prisym ID has to offer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd just like to take a couple of minutes just to let you know a little about the solution that we provide at Prisym ID. Basically, we supply a software package. A large number of companies using this in the life sciences marketplace, a number of pharmaceutical discovery companies and clinical supplies organisations, providing an end-to-end solution for label lifecycle management to manage their clinical trials, labelling and packaging. So basically with Prisym 360, that's the name of the product, the technology provides you with an effective solution. Labels are populated, printed and automatically inspected as part of an on-demand packaging process. In addition, use of the most up-to-date patient, drug and destination-specific label content ensures that the clinical supplies organisations can reduce cost, ensure compliance and maximise patient centricity. So we've spoken about batch and on-demand models, we've spoken about language management and adhering to country-specific regulations and the data-centric design model and also vision inspection. So all these areas are supported by Prisym 360 to provide an elegant technology solution to support your clinical trials labelling on a global scale. So hopefully that's clear in terms of what the product offers. Clearly we're here to answer any other questions you may have would be ideal. So it just leaves for me to sort of thank you very much for listening today, and also to Jason for participating and providing such good insights. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. Also, just a reminder that the copy of the presentations will be distributed after the webinar. And on behalf of FDA News and Prisym ID, I would like to thank our participants for joining us today. Be sure to fill out the survey at the conclusion of this webinar. Your feedback is very important to us. This now concludes today's webinar. Have a great day, and I hope you join us again in the future.